My name is Ian and welcome to Planted. I'm on a mission to help you do more with plants. What I have here is an experiment that I want to share with you to help you better understand how to water. It's at this time of year that I get inundated with questions about watering. And what people want to do is to distill it down to a frequency and a quantity. A pint of water once a week, is that enough? Well, that's not the right way to approach it. And I'm going to use these plants in front of me here to demonstrate that. And I'm going to show you how 8 ounces of water is more than a gallon of water. This is Anisodontia, one of my standout plants from last year. The stem is thick from last year's growth and it was cut back to go through the winter, but it started to put out new shoots. Now this is in the frost-free greenhouse, and what happens is as that temperature increases, this plant will suddenly rocket. So the demand of water that this plant is using now is very different from that a week from now and a week after and a week after. As the crown starts to get bigger, the demand is huge. So this plant was dug up last year. It's an iochroma, and I've got a nice big thick root ball here, but I deliberately cut it back hard. But if you look carefully, you can see it's about to be putting out shoots, and there's lots of them. There's shoots all over this. So this plant is now putting out new growth because the temperature is increasing in the greenhouse. This is going to explode. So the amount of water this plant needs now is quite minimal. But every week that goes by, it will grow significantly. And this is where people cannot rely on the quantity and the frequency. Right now, this might need a cup of water a week. 2 weeks from now, it'll need 2 cups. And then a week after that, it'll need watering every single day until it gets planted out. So how can 8 ounces of water be more than a gallon of water? And it's all down to how you use it. We're all now drawn to automatic irrigation system and drip emitters and ways to get water on our garden automatically. A substantial proportion of that water does not get to the roots. It's spread on surfaces, it's spread on the foliage, and it just evaporates. The way you measure water is the actual amount that gets to the root. If I take this watering can and I put water in this pot, and I'm going to deliberately mess this up, but I put it and I splash it around and I splash it around and I get it up here. You see my point? Only a small amount of that water actually got into the pot. And if the medium in here is really dry, that water will run straight through. Potting medium has got this characteristic called hydrophobia or hydrophobic. It shrinks as it dries, and that leaves you an 1/8 inch gap on all sides of the pot. And the water that I just put in runs straight to those sides and through the root ball, and a minimum of water will be absorbed. So that's why the gallon of water or the watering can is not the holy grail that you might think it is. So this is how 8 ounces of water is more than a gallon. For this example, I've just added a little bit of soluble fertilizer to my 8 ounces and then placed it on a flat tray or plate. I want all of this 8 ounces to be absorbed by my plant, in this case my delphinium. As long as that tray can hold my 8 ounces and it'll be about a 1/2 inch thick, I can put my plant on it and it will carefully absorb all of that water in about 15 or 20 minutes. Manufacturers of potting medium are well aware of the hydrophobic nature of some of their mixes. Many of them have got additives to combat this, but it's something that you have to be aware of, that dry potting mix is, to a degree, water repellent. If you can keep it moist, you'll help your plants. Ground level, we have a plant that was in a pot like that. And here's the beautiful crown. And this can be any plant, tree, shrub, perennial, doesn't matter. Now, if that plant is put in and this is dry and all of this surrounding area has got moisture in it, gradually water from here will migrate into that root ball. Will it migrate in there fast enough to get water to the roots before it dies? That's the big question. The real secret is that every time you put a plant in the ground, this root ball needs to be rehydrated. And the best way by far is to dip it into a trough, dip it into a bucket. Submerge it, drive out all the air, make sure that you've got all of the root ball properly hydrated. And then when you plant it in this environment, you've got no barrier between the root ball and the surrounding soil. Water can go this direction, and water can go out, and it can go down, and it can come up. This is now unified. Once you've got the plant drawing on water from the surrounding area, the amount of water you need to add is greatly reduced. Now let's look at a pot. In the planted courtyard, we've got some nice sized pots. And we have our spectacular looking plant right there, looking very healthy and happy. Now I like to plant and leave a 2-inch gap. What this means is that when I use my watering can, I can flood this top layer and I can fill all of this full of water, and it can gradually percolate down into the root ball, rehydrating all of this as it goes. And obviously that water will end up down here. The same thing is important to understand. If this is dry and you put water in it, like I showed you in the previous experiment, all that water will run down the sides and none of it will go into the pot. So this is where you should have a pot. And you have a little tray. And that means that when you add your water into the container, it will run down through the pot. It will fill the tray. And then that plant can then take up that water and rehydrate the whole root ball. So you've got two methods. Planting a container like this and keeping it properly moistened, properly watered, or putting it in the ground. Either way, you have to make sure that the root ball can receive the water that you're giving it. If it just runs through, you're doing nothing. So I hope that helps. We've got a fictitious plant, and we've got a scale, and this is too wet. Should we get to that mark there, the plant will die. And over here, we have, guess what? Too dry. If we get to that plant, the plant will die. Now the range that this plant will thrive in is anywhere from there to there. This gap, the plant will start to deteriorate rapidly. It won't die, but it will suffer on both ends, too wet and too dry. This area here, this is optimum. So you can water it up until this point, and it's perfect. You can then let it dry out until this point, and then rehydrate it. So just like I showed you with that iochroma, if you rehydrate the ball completely, and there's no leaves on it, and it's just putting out little sprouts, the time for it to go from there to there might be 3 weeks at its current growth rate. But in the summer, that rate would drop to 4 days. Same plant, same condition. Sorry, same location, not same condition. And that's because it's got this huge crown, this very large head. So if we consider this to be the midpoint, it'd be very easy to think that all plants have the ideal amount compared to that. That's just not true. Another plant, this might be its ideal window. With that being optimum, too wet, and this being too dry. It might want it a little bit wetter. Or you could have another plant that's over here that would be much happier being on the drier side and thriving accordingly. So not all plants want the same water. Some will want it drier, some will want it wetter. And then you've also got to take into account the canopy, the head that's on top of that plant. Lots of foliage and lots of fresh growth is going to suck the water out of any soil or any growing medium that the plant is in. Small crown, small head, small roots, no big deal. So please don't consider every plant to be the same, because that's just not the way it is. When watering with a hose, avoid waving it around and getting everything wet. You can't tell how much water you've applied, and a lot of it won't be absorbed by the growing medium. Instead, stand in one location and water plants for about 30 seconds. Then move on and do 3 or 4 more plants before you come back and re-water that first plant. In the middle of this picture we have a pot with fig tree in. That fig will get 3 or 4 waterings, each of about 30 seconds. This water can be absorbed by the growing medium and made available to the plant. I've always enjoyed watering, and in my little courtyard it's a very enjoyable task. I get a chance to look at my plants, see what's growing, and in this case I'm watering new seedlings with a very fine mist, because that's what they need. The way you apply water is nothing more than a tool. It can be submerging, it can be in a tray, it can be a hose, it can be with a watering can. Your job is to water the growing medium, whether it's potting mix or it's soil, and then the plants can use that to take up the water. Happy planting.